This isn't just some random neighborhood drama. It's not just about HOA rules, parking violations, or grass height. This is about power, about abuse, about what happens when people think they can play cops, targeting someone because of the color of their skin. But in this case, their arrogance put them face to face with the one man they never should have crossed. Stick with me, because the way this story unfolds will leave you shaking your head in disbelief. The neighborhood looked calm on the outside. Neatly cut lawns, two-car garages, families jogging with strollers, and retirees watering flowers. On the surface, it was the kind of place people worked their whole lives to move into. But behind the perfectly painted fences and welcome home signs, there was an HOA board that acted more like a private police force. They had their own security team, men dressed in black uniforms with knockoff police patches stitched onto their shoulders. They carried radios, wore utility belts, and drove SUVs with magnetic decals slapped on the side that read, HOA Security Enforcement. To outsiders, it might look official, but to anyone who knew the law, it was a bad imitation. The problem? These guys loved targeting the black families in the neighborhood. They wrote up citations for petty things, trash bins being left out a few minutes late, grass being an inch too tall, kids playing basketball in the driveway. And if you tried to argue, they show up at your door, knocking hard, acting like they had real authority. And one man, Derek, had become their favorite target. Derek had moved into the neighborhood a few years earlier. He paid his dues, kept his property clean, and minded his own business. He wasn't the type to throw parties, argue with neighbors, or break rules. But he was a black man living in a space they thought belonged to them. That alone made him a problem in their eyes. The HOA security wrote him up over nonsense. First, they said his car was parked too close to the sidewalk. Then they claimed his mailbox didn't meet the approved color scheme. Another time, they even accused him of violating noise restrictions because he closed his car door too loud at night. It was harassment, plain and simple. On one particular evening, Derek came home from work later than usual. The sun was setting, painting the street in a dim orange glow. He pulled his car into his driveway, tired, ready to get inside and relax. But instead of peace, he was met with flashing lights. Not from a police cruiser, but from two black SUVs parked crooked on the curb. Before Derek could even step out of his car, four men in dark uniforms surrounded him. Their outfits were carefully crafted to mimic real cops: black cargo pants, boots, badges clipped to their belts. But something about them looked off. Their patches didn't match any known department. The words HOA Security Police were stitched in bold white letters across their chests. "Step out of the vehicle," one of them barked, banging on Derek's window. At first, Derek thought it was a prank, some neighbors playing a joke. But when he looked around, he saw people peeking through blinds, standing on porches, holding up phones to record. This wasn't a prank. This was a performance, and Derek was the target. He rolled down his window just enough to speak. "What's the problem?" The man shoved a paper citation through the gap. "Multiple violations. You've ignored warnings. You're under arrest under HOA authority." Derek almost laughed out loud. HOA authority, that wasn't even a thing. But these guys weren't smiling. One reached for the door handle. Another kept his hand hovering near a holster, though Derek could tell from experience it was just pepper spray, not a real gun. Still, they were trying to look intimidating. Now here's what they didn't know. Derek wasn't just a quiet neighbor. He wasn't just some random guy who lived down the block. By day, he blended in. But in reality, he was one of the most effective FBI agents in the country. He'd taken down drug cartels, busted corrupt politicians, and even infiltrated organized crime groups. People whispered his name in fear on the streets, and these wannabe HOA cops had just put themselves in his crosshairs. The leader of the group leaned closer. "Step out now, or we'll remove you by force." Derek kept his cool. He'd seen this 100 times before, men desperate for power, using fake authority to intimidate those they thought were powerless. He had two choices: blow his cover immediately and shut them down, or let them keep digging their own grave. He decided to wait. Slowly, Derek opened the door and stepped out. At 6 feet tall, with a calm but commanding presence, he didn't look like someone who scared easily. But the men shoved him against the car anyway, trying to establish dominance. One of them patted him down while the others kept their eyes on the gathering neighbors. This was their show, their big moment. Phones were out. People were whispering. Some even shook their heads, assuming Derek must have done something wrong. That's how quickly the narrative can turn, how easily people can believe what they see when someone in a fake uniform tells them it's true. Inside, Derek felt anger boiling, not because they were harassing him, he could handle himself, but because he knew how many others had been humiliated the same way. How many black men had been targeted, embarrassed, written up, fined, or worse. He knew what could happen when fake power went unchecked. As they reached for his wallet, Derek finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady. "Do you realize impersonating an officer is a federal crime?" The men paused. Their faces flickered with uncertainty. One of them muttered, "We have jurisdiction here. We are the HOA police." Derek almost smirked. He had seen better fake badges sold at flea markets. The metal was cheap, the seal was wrong, and not a single number or department code was visible. Amateurs. The leader sneered. "We don't need your permission. You're in violation. We've got you." And that's when Derek made a decision. He wasn't going to stop them yet. Not until they went far enough to hang themselves with their own rope. He wanted them to feel like they were winning, like they had control, right up until the moment he pulled the rug from under them. They shoved him again, this time harder, pressing his face against the hood of his car. The cold metal dug into his cheek as they fumbled with handcuffs. Neighbors gasped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others filmed every second, their cameras capturing the arrogance, the fake power trip. Finally, one of them reached into Derek's back pocket and pulled out his wallet. They flipped it open, expecting a driver's license, but instead they froze. Inside wasn't just a license. It wasn't just an ID. It was a badge, a real one, gleaming under the fading sunlight, the unmistakable gold of the FBI. The leader's mouth fell open. His face went pale. This can't be real. Derek turned his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "Try me." And right there, in the middle of his driveway, the fake HOA police realized they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But the real story hadn't even begun yet. Because when Derek made one single phone call, the entire neighborhood, and the men who thought they were in charge, would never be the same again. The fake HOA cops froze. Their faces turned pale as they stared at my badge, the FBI emblem glinting under the streetlights. "You're your FBI," the leader stammered, his voice shaking. I didn't answer. I just stepped closer, letting the badge catch the last light of dusk. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next move," I said calmly. One of them tried to reach for his radio. Another inched toward his SUV. Their small acts of defiance only made the tension thicker. The whole street seemed to hold its breath. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed. "Yes, I need immediate support. 4 individuals impersonating federal officers, attempting unlawful detainment. Location," I rattled off my address. The moment I hit send, I could see it in their eyes. They knew they had no backup, no authority, no real power, and it terrified them. Within minutes, the rumble of engines cut through the quiet neighborhood. Black SUVs rolled into the street, not the fake ones, but real FBI vehicles, flashing lights and tactical agents spilling out. Neighbors peeked through blind, some taking videos, some frozen in shock. The fake cops' bravado evaporated. Hands went up, faces drained of color. They were suddenly small men in cheap uniforms pretending to be bigger than they were. "Hands where we can see them," one of the agents barked. They froze like deer caught in headlights. And at that moment, I knew the first phase of this fight was over. But the war had only just begun. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. "Did you see what happened last night?" one neighbor whispered. "They tried to arrest him and he's FBI," another gasped. Families who had quietly endured harassment over the years began stepping forward. Stories poured out. Fines for trash bins left out too long, citations for kids playing basketball, threats delivered at midnight. Mrs. Green, the elderly woman next door, approached me. Her hands shook as she held my arm. "I've seen this happen before, families intimidated, scared, pushed out. But no one ever stood up. Thank you for doing that." Her words reminded me why I couldn't let this end here. The fake cops weren't just targeting me, they were targeting the entire community. I spent the next day going through documents, recordings, and financial trails. The HOA board had been funding the fake police through shell companies, laundering money, and threatening homeowners to pay fines they didn't owe. The deeper I dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't a group of rogue men. It was a coordinated system to intimidate black families. Even worse, the leader, Bradley Kent, had a history. A former sheriff's deputy removed for racial misconduct. He had built this operation to enforce order while actually preying on vulnerable residents. It was calculated, it was cruel, and it had to stop. Working with the FBI, we set up surveillance. Cameras were placed around the neighborhood, phone lines monitored, and financial accounts traced. Each day the fake cops grew bolder, not knowing we were watching. Their arrogance would be their downfall. They threatened more residents, sent warnings, and even tried to intimidate families into silence. But every move they made was being documented, every illegal action captured. The plan was simple: let them dig their own hole, then collapse it on them completely. One evening they attempted to approach me again, thinking I was alone. This time I didn't wait for their bluff. "Going somewhere?" I asked calmly, stepping out onto my driveway. Their leader laughed, trying to reclaim authority. "You think the Bureau can touch us? We control this block." I shook my head slowly. "Control? You've been lying to yourself, and soon the world will see it too." Their attempt to physically intimidate me failed because I remained composed. I let them approach, then stepped back, subtly giving the surveillance cameras a perfect view. By the time they realized I wasn't bluffing, real agents were already in position. Within moments, all 4 fake cops were in handcuffs. Neighbors, some still filming, whispered to one another, "Justice finally has a face." Once in custody, the fake HOA officers revealed the extent of their operation. Illegal surveillance of black families, extortion through fake fines, coordination with HOA board members to remove undesired tenants. Every revelation painted a picture of systemic abuse, not just isolated harassment. The HOA board itself couldn't escape scrutiny. Bank records, emails, and meeting notes showed direct involvement in funding and directing the fake police. When the trial began, Bradley Kent tried to spin a narrative of protecting the neighborhood. Lawyers claimed I provoked the fake officers, trying to make me look like the aggressor. Some neighbors initially backed his story, afraid of retaliation. But then Mrs. Green stood up in court. "I've lived here for 40 years, watching families get bullied by these people. Agent Briggs did what no one else had the courage to do. He protected us." Her testimony broke the dam. Other previously silent neighbors stepped forward, corroborating every story of harassment. The court saw a full picture of intimidation, abuse of power, and racial targeting. After days of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict on every count. Bradley Kent, 25 years for extortion, fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. Fake HOA police, multiple felony charges including impersonating law enforcement and obstruction of justice. The neighborhood began to breathe again. Families felt a sense of relief, even if the psychological scars lingered. I sat on my porch that night, thinking about what had happened. I had faced drug cartels, organized crime, and violent criminals overseas. But the cruelty here hit closer to home. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was systemic, insidious, and all too familiar. These fake cops thought they could intimidate and silence black families. But standing up wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about showing that injustice cannot go unchecked. Sometimes it means standing alone, but that courage inspires others. That's the power they underestimated. For every family ever intimidated, every voice ever silenced, remember this: courage matters. One person's bravery can change the course of a whole community. Because when people like Bradley Kent think they're untouchable, someone has to rise. And that's exactly what happened here. And if you think that was shocking, wait until you hear what happened when I returned to work at the bureau the next day. Because the fallout from this case didn't just stay in the neighborhood. It followed me straight into federal offices, and what I uncovered there was even more shocking. Subscribe if you got value from this video.